Welcome you at the Thursday of Digital Dragons. Let's make some noise. And let's welcome our beloved guest. Here with me are Mikael Kasurinen from Remedy Entertainment. Tom Heaton, Supermassive Games. Mr. Kelvin, Sumo Digital. And of course, our beloved Prince of Darkness, Mr. Wojciech Piejko. That was just a quick reminder of awesome games made by our guests. Gentlemen, let's start with some major shit, because on behalf not only the reviewers, but also your players, I need to ask, are we doomed and walking simulators with cheap jump scares are like the future of the genre? Not everyone, or perhaps Wojciech.
I did one. It's called The Observer, so yeah, maybe this is a good question for me. So yeah, a lot of people are calling, our games like walking simulators, but of course now we are doing a remake of Silent Hill 2, so yeah, maybe our press will be different after this, but yeah, for me it's like I do not feel offended, of course. I'm not easy offended person, but it's kind of more offensive to a logic, calling genres by the mechanics used in games. Like imagine this in a movies. You will have like close-up movies, or drone filmed movies and stuff like this. I mean that. It's kind of funny, but it's like a meme become a genre, yeah. But of course, it's cool. I understand it, But back in my day, they were more calling it like a puzzle or adventure games, and I think that's what we are doing. But yeah, they are a future. I think not. I think that the most successful and most cool indie horror games right now are not first-person walking sims anymore. I'm talking, for example, about my favorite indie game, Signalis. It's super awesome game, It's like Resident Evil 2, let's say, style of gameplay translated into this top-down isometric view. And the game also has combat, and it's awesome. I think this is the future, or the upcoming post-trauma game about this chubby guy who walks up in the underground. There are also, very, very good games, and I think they are now the future of the genre.
So I've never done a walking simulator myself, but I think looking at it from a game direction perspective, there's an interesting dilemma at the heart of it, like how much agency do you give to the player? And I think, like looking back at, let's say, when we worked on Alan Wake, we kind of just came out from, doing Max Payne 2, and we really wanted to discover like a horror experience, but also at the same time, we wanted to make like a solid action game. And it led to kind of a design direction that I think is a bit hypocritical almost in a way, where you actually are able to defeat the enemies quite easily once you kind of learn how to use the different mechanics. And it can affect the way you kind of take the pressure and the threat from the enemies, because they will feel less dangerous the moment you feel like you have the means to deal with them. And when I play these kind of walking simulator horror games, I actually enjoy the limitations, that there's not much that I can do in these situations, and it actually amps up the pressure and the tension and so on. So I think it's an interesting dilemma. You get some, you lose some, and I think ultimately it's really about the overall game direction that's in place, like what is it that you want to evoke within the players.
A follow-up question to you guys. As Mikael stated, horror is all about limitations, and I'm curious because combat system is one of the most challenging systems to implement into video games, and how to avoid turning your psychological survival horrors into cheap shooters.
I don't quite understand the question, actually.
Well, in Poland, in Europe, globally speaking, there's a bunch of walking simulators with no combat system at all. But you guys are trying to implement combat system into a genre which is all about limitation. That's about fear, about feeling hopeless.
Okay, I've got it. Sorry, I misheard you. So, yeah, first of all, I mean, walking simulator is a gatekeeping term, really. It's a term that people use because they have an idea of very pure gameplay, and they want to protect that. And we should kind of ignore it, because the game industry has moved on, and it's opened up to lots more ways of experiencing content, and that's opened up to much wider audiences. And horror's really benefited from that, I think. You can have one of the ironies of horror is that you actually don't want the player to be too powerful. You don't want the player to be tooled up with loads of weapons, because that gives them the option of fighting back, and you lose the fear. It becomes an action game. So you actually want to take away a little bit of the agency. I'll just come back to jump scares, because I've certainly made extensive use of jump scares in my work. I would say they're not cheap. They're often really expensive, because you have to get them exactly right. You have to iterate them over and over again, because if there's one little bit of them wrong, the audio's timed wrongly, the animation is timed wrongly, then they simply won't function as a jump scare. And they are essential. People want to be scared, and they want to be shocked. They can certainly be overused, and I think that's where some of the criticism comes from. They need to be used in conjunction with a load of other gameplay. But that's one of the things that people sign up for when they buy our games. They expect to get jump scares, and they would certainly be disappointed if there weren't any.
Yeah, for kind of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we're a different type of horror game. Again, we're more multiplayer, and the thing Tom said there about kind of keeping some of the players vastly underpowered, that's where part of the horror and the tension comes in. When we started with the project, we thought, should we have kind of the victims be able to fight back? But as soon as you give the players that option, it becomes the go-to. They want to go straight to the action thing. So it's like, no, we've got to put you underpowered. And it's about bringing your team on that journey as well. When we first started, we're massively trying to strike the right balance between overpowered, underpowered. One of the first things we did, we put one-hit kills in, and that instantly brought the team on that journey of this is how it's going to be. It's not one-hit kill. Now we've balanced that and everything, but you have to take people on that journey about being underpowered and getting the mechanics right for that. Regarding the walking simulator, I mean, horror is such a massive genre in itself now, and there's space for probably what people would determine as a kind of walking simulator, but there's kind of PG-13 horror games all the way up to kind of gory adult 18+ horror games. There's things that are for everywhere on the platform Roblox. They have horror games on there for kind of smaller kids with their jump scares, and is it Little Piggy and stuff like that. It's there's so much out there for everyone, and games as a whole, they're always growing. There's new genres always being born. So, yeah.
Okay, now how to direct video game? Because obviously, you're limited to the nature of video game itself. I mean, you can't always decide, I don't know, about what player is looking at.
Right. So I want to say one thing, like I feel a bit outplayed and outgunned here because I feel like Remedy games, I don't think we actually called any of the games that we have like a true horror game, and we kind of want to find that side of action, and that's what we want to kind of lean on. So there is that same dilemma that we spoke about earlier, that when the players feel like they have a lot of agency and choice, it can eat away the sense of horror that you might have. So the contextual build-up needs to be done with that in mind. When you look at the games, like in Control, for instance, we didn't set out to do a horror game specifically, but we wanted to be unsettling. And the horror was not something that is explicitly there, but implicitly there, meaning that it's a bit more cerebral, like you have to pay attention, read the different documents that you find, and once you kind of dig into it, you start to kind of not necessarily fully realize what is happening, because Control can be a very confusing game, but it's inviting the players to dig in and try to kind of see what is happening and so on. And once they start to see the little hints and clues of what's happening, that can evoke a sense of horror or dread. And I believe that that was the kind of a right way to go to kind of discover that side within this world, yet at the same time give the player a lot of tools and means to survive and fight back. And in Control, you definitely kind of become a very powerful person at some point, but hopefully the world still leaves a sense of unsettling feeling upon the player.
Wojciech, anything to add?
Yeah, so maybe I also add a little to this. So directing horror game, I saw once a YouTube video comparing to, pulling of good jump scares, or basically, directing horror is like doing a magic trick. And I think that's true. The magic trick, I mean, there is something that the magicians are calling the pledge, something that is, luring you towards something. So, for example, you hear the scratches from behind the door or something. Yeah, so the player is, attracted to this, and even when you don't know where he looks, he will be attracted by sound and something like it. Okay, the player opens the door, and now in the magic trick is a turn that something appears to be different. For example, there is like a cat there scratching something, and then the player's tension fall down, because he went there very pumped. Oh no, there will be monsters or something like it there. No, but no, that's the cat, and that's your moment, because now the player is off guard. So something, and then you spawn the monster behind the player, for example. And yeah, this is something very, very important in my opinion, to constantly build the tension and drop it by something. Sometimes by jump scares, sometimes by even something funny. But the player cannot be on their toes for the whole time. You have to carefully build the tension, drop it, build and drop it until the end of the game. And yeah, in my opinion, overusing the jump scares is not cool. But there are different kind of players. Someone love it, someone don't. Of course, we also did it in the Observer. But for example, in the Medium, we did only one jump scare in the first 2 hours of the game. And to be honest, I did it just to do it, to implement in the minds of the players that this shit may happen. And then they are scared for the rest of the game.
I'm glad that you mentioned that a little bit of humor could be like a huge relief in terms of horror video games. But a follow-up question, because Bloober team is well known for its great but somehow minimalistic horrors. And I'm curious how you want to balance gameplay and narrative parts in upcoming Silent Hill 2.
I'm sorry, but I think it's a better question for the other team members, because I'm not involved in the Silent Hill 2 project.
So guys, want to tell us something about balancing gameplay elements and narrative?
Yeah, I can pick up on that. So in Until Dawn and in the Dark Pictures games, the Supermassive make, the twist really is that we integrate gameplay into the narrative. Usually we offer player choices, but there are other mechanisms we do that. And those player choices have a significant and a real impact on a narrative. And in a way, the player is creating their own version of the narrative. There are constraints on that, of course. They can't go too off the rails. We still have to deliver a story. So that was the decision we made. And it's worked well for us. But the thing about that is, if you're going to do it, you have to completely commit to it. It has to be the main feature of your game, really. It becomes very expensive. Because if you don't commit to it, you get a kind of choose-your-own-ending situation, which isn't very satisfying for the player. But the way we do it, the choices continually add up to create another narrative. The other thing that's interesting, I think, in terms of integrating gameplay and narrative is that there's this wonderful thing that people now use called walk and talk. So in the old days, we would have action levels, which would be pure gameplay, and then we'd go to cutscenes, which would be no gameplay at all, but would tell a story. And now we've got this in-between stage, games like The Last of Us do it really well, God of War does it really well, where actually the player is in a kind of gameplay, usually walking, maybe some simple traversal, but a lot of narrative is being communicated about those characters, maybe some exposition, and it just gives a seamlessness between the cutscenes and the actual gameplay, and it allows you to kind of go into those. And that's a really helpful development throughout the industry.
You mentioned characters, and as horror creators, you need to present to us, players, believable, lovable sometimes, protagonists and characters. And I'm curious about techniques or tools you use to present, those characters.
I mean, I'm happy to pick up on that again, sure.
Okay.
Because it could be, games are very character. I'll keep it short, though. So in terms of creating believable characters, you have to hire good writers. You can do all sorts of other things, but ultimately hire good writers, because you will not get good characters without them. They have all sorts of techniques, all sorts of narrative tricks, but get good people, because otherwise you won't do it. What's very important for us is to have very believable performances, so we've invested a lot of money in getting state-of-the-art motion capture and performance capture. That's an ongoing area of research for us, because we need that connection between the player and the characters, and we try and establish it really early in the game.
Yes, we're fortunate with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We have a film to kind of start with on that basis, but obviously we need more characters, and there's been a lot of work done kind of by Sumo and by the guys at Gun as well, to look at these characters, the time, the period that they're from, kind of what was going on in the world around then, and kind of continuing that narrative. Again, echoing kind of what Tom says about the motion capture performances as well. All of those character backstories and kind of what they've been through all comes through the actions that they perform in the motion capture, the way they walk, the way they idle. You're kind of selling that kind of character all the way through. The other thing is kind of, we've got the narrative storytelling dressing of the levels. For us, these matches take place in kind of the homestead of the family and a couple of other locations, and they're dressed much like this kind of cannibalistic family would have. I mean, cannibalistic's not the right term, but they're dressed very much like they've taken over and inhabited it, and what you see on the walls and kind of how stuff's dressed, it all builds that character for those characters in the world.
Mikael?
There's an interesting challenge when talking about characters where you have your main protagonist, if you're doing that type of a game, where they are put into this high-pressure situation, and we want them to feel the pressure and the threats that they kind of perceive within the world, but we don't want them to project necessarily too strong emotions either, like being too scared, because you're still controlling the character. You don't want to feel that weird dissonance where the character is scared, yet you kind of want to go further within the world. At least what we often do as Remedy is that we have those NPCs, usually the side characters, who tend to be the kind of the projections of the emotions of the world. So they are the ones who usually are the ones that feel more strongly what is happening and projecting that upon the player, while the main characters tend to be a bit stoic and kind of a silent. At least that's how we approach it. And I'm kind of wondering, maybe asking other guests, that how do you deal with that dilemma? Is it leading to a more boring character when you kind of hold back on how they feel in these high pressure situations? Is there like a take on that?
Okay, so I think you guys are right. You know, to create a very cool and memorable character, you need the backstory, you need the writers there to do their job. You know, think how the character is and the quirks of the character, and then at the end you're adding a voice to your character or a face or something. Yeah, and in my opinion, the last ingredient is also like a concept of the character, how it looks. And you know, in my opinion, it's kind of easy to create the characters if you think that the character should have at least, or maybe not at least, 3 things that are super memorable. Like think of Indiana Jones. He have a hat, he have a jacket, and he probably have a whip. And you can cosplay this character very easily. And if you are thinking this about your characters, you can create them more memorable. Like in our game, Marianne, you know, has a jacket, you can easily cosplay her. She has a necklace, it's also pink, and she has a glove on one of her hand because she have a burn marks and something. So yeah, you can easily, you know, dress as this character or our observer. I know that, you know, at the end, Rutger Hauer became the observer, so he took the role, you know, he created this character. But even before it, we also did like, yeah, he is a cyberpunk detective, so of course he have a code. Yeah, but to be different from other characters, he have this mechanic arm, you know. And the last thing that he has, what's distinguishable, was his hollow badge, you know. That okay, he's different from other, let's say, cyberpunkish noir characters by this thing. So I think, yeah, this is also super important.
I just wanted to say quickly that Observer is a fucking amazing game.
Give some applause, yeah. Raz.
And Control is also super amazing.
You are awesome, you know? Anyway, I'm curious how to test and iterate how you test and iterate your games, because you're pros, you know? You know what you're doing, no doubt about it, but at some point you need to invite the players.
So testing your game is probably one of the most important things you do, and getting it in other players' hands really early is vitally important. You guys are playing it daily. There's a lot of assumptions made that people will understand things. I remember we first got some kind of play testers coming in on Texas nearly a year and a half ago, and we got some students from the local college, and they came in, and there's a lot of nervousness on the team. Are they going to understand the mechanics? Are they going to know what to do? What are the objectives? And you give it them, and they get it. And it's so rewarding. And then you take that feedback and you iterate on it and kind of make things better. And we've had the same group back in 3 times, and it's great when they can even pull out what you've improved, what you've made better, and what feedback you've gone through as well. So yeah, playtesting is a fantastic tool, and people should do it more. The biggest thing for me, I mean, you can put surveys out afterwards and ask them what they did and stuff. The biggest thing is watching other people play your title and kind of seeing the raw emotion. We'd watch them play, we'd see them struggle with something, then we'd ask them afterwards, so how did you get on? And it's like, oh, it was great, I understood everything. It's like, no, you didn't. We saw you, like, we know we need to fix that. So there's a great thing there, and then kind of we're here to talk about horror. So how do you kind of bring up that tension and stuff? I mean, I'm happy to say that we've had people having to kind of tap out and stop playing after one session, so I think we got the horror tone right in Texas.
We did actually on a couple of our games. We don't do it anymore, but we did wire up people to heart rate monitors while we played, and that was fun. You could kind of get quite an extreme spike if you do a scare right, if the tension is building. That's very nice. But ultimately, we found it was just as good to watch them. You know, if they were scared, their bodies naturally demonstrated that fear. I agree. We test extremely early at storyboard stage. We will get a bunch of players in to play the game. It looks nothing like the final game, but it's early enough to do they understand the story? Are they finding the characters compelling? So really early on.
I couldn't agree with you more, guys. Yeah, playtesting is a gold in game dev. Yep. We are also doing this. We are starting with, because we are most of the time running 2 projects at the same time, so we are, starting, showing the game to our other team, and then do these, bigger play tests, and of course watching the players doing it. And at the end, we are also doing, probably like you guys, silent reviews, to check the game with the press, how it will be, found by the audience then, and of course then tweaking a lot of stuff after this. So yeah, playtests are everything.
Thanks, guys. And do we have Resident Evil fans on the audience? Not at all? Really? That's a great series. And, Resident Evil 4 was a huge success, and which leads me to another question. What does this mean to the future of horror? I mean, does it discourage creating new IPs?
I don't think it does. I would hope that kind of with the remakes that go on, it's great to retell those stories with new mechanics, and the quality and fidelity of video games now is so high, and the tools available are so amazingly powerful. To retell those things again is fantastic, and hopefully, they are successful, and they will launch successors and allow people to kind of try other things. If you like this, maybe you move into that. The other kind of powerful thing we've got at the minute is the platform providers with their pass and subscription services, putting those games straight into players' hands. You've instantly got a massive audience out there for people to try your kind of new titles instantly. You've not got to try and get them to part with their kind of £50 off the shelf sort of thing. It's a great time for players, and it's a great time for developers. And we're here, we're working on horror games, and I've seen out there's many other people working on horror titles. I think there's great scope for kind of new ways to touch the genre.
Yep, I totally agree. It's like sometimes Resident Evil 4, because it's more, let's say, action-oriented, it may be an entry point for a lot of players to, let's say, invest their time in other horror games. I think, as guys said, the market is big, we can share that cake, between our games. Like even our presence here, we are doing horrors and different ones, and, and that's great,
Speaking about Resident Evil, it was a huge success, but some of the players criticized Capcom openly about, as they said, being too woke. And I'm curious, are we doomed, and over-sexualized damsel in distress will be with the horror genre for the end of times?
I don't mind taking that. So is there a concern over damsel in distress and other kind of tropes like that in horror games? Yes, that's definitely something that we should be thinking about, and I think that's a fair criticism of Resident Evil 4, actually. I'm playing through that now, and it's noticeable. It feels a little bit dated, that whole setup with Ashley, I would say. So, yeah, we think about that a lot, that you can go to people within the industry that will give you kind of a review your game. It's not just about damsel in distress, it's about all sorts of representation issues. I think you have to be aware of that, and this is the world we live in. There's lots of diverse audiences that we want. We make a great deal of effort to have a diverse cast, and it doesn't impact the horror negatively at all. No, this is the responsibility of making games in the 2020s.
Yeah, you can. There's a danger of tunnel vision that can occur when you're creating these type of games, and I think it's just extremely important that you are making sure that you get the input from all possible directions and open that up to a diverse range of people, just to make sure that you are not stepping into any kind of issues from this place. And it's very important to acknowledge that you can't just think about it yourself. It's something that you have to open up and kind of connect with your audience and make sure that you're handling all of these type of things in the correct way.
Okay, and then my last question is rather open. Why do we like horror? Because, you know, we associate with a part of culture that evokes fear in us, which is like somehow weird to do so. So what's like, what is the main reason why we like this kind of culture, this kind of video games?
I notice myself as I grow older that what really I feel is kind of pushing the envelope tends to be horror. When you look at movies and so on, pop culture, I feel like a lot of the coolest, more interesting, the weirdest stuff that is provocative is happening in horror. And that is very influential to me, and I feel like games have that same kind of opportunity that exists. And with Control, what we pushed a lot was to kind of push towards that direction. I feel what horror can, like powerful horror to me is when you're facing something that you don't understand, something unknown, something that you can't piece together, that is impenetrable. And when you face something like that, that really kind of affects you. And I feel like horror is doing those type of things. And I feel like as we step into a more like, are we saying postmodern environment, I feel like horror is that kind of a space where we're doing the most innovative things right now.
Yeah, and also you have to remember that all the good horror, not only games, but movies and books, are not only about, you know, scaring the shit out of you. There's always like a story behind it. Maybe sometimes it's very symbolic and, you know, you need to be deciphered and so on. But, you know, this is the medium that tells very powerful and touching stories, you know. But you have to dig deeper to understand it. And of course there is like a, don't you dare to watch this, you know, or you are always tempted to survive, you know, and all that relief that comes after being scared, you know, it's also something very important for a lot of people. And as in, you know, comic books and, you know, movies, we also like villains, you know, because we are not, you know, black and white, you know, everyone has their own demons, and sometimes you can, you know, face them by watching, playing, and, you know, being in horror.
I think a thing for horror as well is they do a lot of things that aren't really in everyone's heads. There's a lot of shock and awe in the things they do, and you're like, who designed this? Who made this? Who thought of this kind of sick or twisted thing? And it shocks us and it surprises us, and it's new. You know, we're not following tropes all the time, and that's what excites me about horror. And especially when we move over to games now, we get to kind of, we watch those films, we see them always doing the same kind of mistakes and tricks, and you know, I wouldn't do that. You know, why they're running in a straight line and stuff like that. You play the games and you're in that mindset now, and you're doing the exact same mistakes to them, and you know, you can show them how it's done. So horror is just a vast genre as well. You've got your slashes, you've got your psychological, you've got your supernatural. It's a vast genre with so many cool ways to take it. And another big thing is the believability of horror sometimes. It's the ones that are set in a very modern world, and it's like, that could actually have happened somewhere. The original Texas Chainsaw was flagged with a kind of based on true events thing. And you know, that it could have been. It was very of the time, kind of what was going on in that part of the world and everything. It's, you know, there's a believability about the shocking nature of what you're about to see.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think for me, one of the things about horror is that it's a very extreme medium, and that allows it to go to bits of the human experience that other art forms approach a bit more tentatively. The horror just dives straight in there, and it will disgust you, and it will make you very frightened. And that is curiously pleasurable for an audience. We have this deep evolutionary thing, response to stress, which is our fight or flight response. And there's a couple of different responses. Freeze is another response, or sometimes, or fawning, where you try and plead with whoever's trying to hurt you. But most of the time, when they're under that sort of stress, then people adopt a fight or flight. And the body pumps lots of chemicals around cortisol and adrenaline to prepare you for whatever action you're going to take. And that's very pleasurable, actually. Once you've got through that, you're left with this kind of high. So horror is trying to get into that space. It's trying to provoke this fight or flight response, which is it's going to the subconscious. It's going underneath the bit of your brain that's working everything out rationally, and going to the bit of your brain that can't do that and still has to find a response. And horror is curiously is often quite healing. Often horror is about trauma to some extent. Think of the film Midsommar. That's a film that's about someone who's experienced extreme trauma, and the whole of that film is about that character processing that trauma and, in a weird way, being healed. And that's often what horror is doing. It's people facing up to their worst fears, the things they're most afraid of, but they do face up to them, and they survive, and at the end of the film or game or whatever it is, they're more equipped for the future. Someone else has said it's a fantastic genre. It's got very, very many subgenres. It's able to really take on anything. I love films like Get Out that are really able to look at social issues through the medium of horror. Horror often uses really extreme metaphors. Get Out's a great example of a body swapping to talk about American social issues. So it's great. It's a very exciting genre to be in, and it's becoming bigger and bigger. It used to be quite a niche genre. Now it's a very mainstream genre indeed.
I actually love Get Out. It's a horror about discrimination, and I'm curious when we, as video game players, could participate in a video game that could be similar in terms of maturity of the story.
Yeah, I would love to do that too. It is difficult. I think some of the things you were talking about earlier about controlling the player action make that a little bit harder. So in Get Out, that's a completely linear experience where the director has control of absolutely everything that happens on every single frame of the movie. We don't have that on games. And to some extent, and probably for commercial reasons, I think we've slightly shied away from those social issues. But I believe it will happen because I think there would be a huge appetite. If someone could get that right and find a way of doing that, I think that would be a big hit.
So as you said, there's more to be done, but thank you for your amazing job. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a panel about the science in horror, sponsored by Fearfest, and my guests were Mikael, Kasurinen, Remedy Entertainment, Kasurinen, sorry for that, Tom Heaton from Supermassive Games, Kelvin Moore, Sumo Digital, and Wojciech, Piejko, Bloober team. Thank you very much.